Hello, Geshe. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, I do. I can hear you. Yes. Hi,
there.
everyone. Great.
Thank you so much again for teaching this last session. Thank you so much, Geshe.
Sure, of course. We've got a minute, right? Let's wait.
Yes. Yes.
For a minute. Okay.
So welcome back, everybody, for joining us for the last session with Geshe for the review of Yangten Rinpoche's teachings and question and answer. It's great seeing you all here. Thank you so much for sticking with us. Has been great having you. And yeah, enjoy the session. And please be aware we have more things coming up very, very soon. If you would like to spread the word about our introductory courses, we will host the last batch of introductory courses in September with Venerable Droma, and then a 1 month intermediate course, Insight into Emptiness with Venerable Droma. So if you would like to deepen your knowledge about emptiness, that would be your chance. So it will be on our website very soon. Thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the last session.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Geshe.
All right. Okay, so let's start with setting our motivation. Thinking that may this last session today become a cause for us to gain a better understanding of emptiness, so that we'll eventually fully realize its meaning. Which will then enable us to remove all the obstructions to liberation as well as to enlightenment. In order to attain the enlightened mind of a Buddha. So that we are of greatest, fullest benefit for all sentient beings, that we can be effectively leading sentient beings towards the state of liberation. And with this motivation, let's also recite the prayer. Ben, if you can lead us in the refuge and bodhicitta prayer.
I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Okay, great. All right. Well, what I'd like to do today, just go through some of the things Rinpoche said yesterday, but not very extensively, just to bring up some of the more important points and briefly go over the text once again, just to summarize it. This is what it says, first, second, and third section, and so forth. All right, so something I'd like to start with today is that Rinpoche used examples, analogies for describing emptiness. Of course, there are endless examples, analogies, I mean, many different ones that are used in the texts. But Rinpoche mentioned dreams, but mainly talked about the rope and the snake example and the magical illusion. And they're used slightly differently. Dreams, magical illusions, they're used in a similar way, explaining that things don't exist the way they appear. So the dream example, the dream is like you have a dream consciousness to which things exist in a way in which they don't exist, as if there was an elephant in the room or there was a house, when in actuality you're sleeping in a flat, for instance. So therefore, the mind here being mistaken with regard to the things appearing to it while you're dreaming, and then when you wake up, then you become aware of the faulty appearance. And then there's the magical apparition, and that is even used more often, more frequently, in that you talk about this spell that affects your eyes, and due to that, on the basis of a pebble and a piece of wood, a horse and an elephant appear. That's usually the example. So it's based on, well, the Indian, based on India, where you have these wandering kind of magicians walking around and getting a small donation for displaying different magical illusions. So what happens, one example, the example here is that you have a crowd of like the audience, and then you have the magician himself. And as he casts the spell, the magician himself is affected by the appearance, and so is the audience. And that means that the spell, that's like the ignorance, that's like the misapprehension of reality, which affects everyone's consciousness, in that everything appears as if inherently existent. So just as the ignorance is responsible for whatever appears to us as existing inherently, or just as in the example, just as the magical spell affects everyone's eyes, including the magician's eyes, in that same way, we are affected by the ignorance, and even someone who's realized emptiness. So we're like just so the audience is like just ordinary people like ourselves who haven't realized emptiness yet. So we're fooled by the appearance. We also believe in what appears to us. Whereas a person who's realized emptiness, who's realized it conceptually, or even better, directly, well, they understand that although things appear, they still appear when they arise from the meditative state. Well, they're aware that things still appear as if existing inherently, but since they know they don't exist that way, well, they're not fooled by it. And that's the example Rinpoche gave towards the end as part of the last question that was asked, that in that way, the appearance is still there, but you know things are empty. So you bring together appearance, the inherent, the appearance of things existing inherently, but knowing that they don't exist that way. So that's the example of the magical spell. You may even mention, or the magical apparition. You may even add a further person, like not the audience who's totally enchanted by whatever appears to them, nor the magician, but a person who comes afterwards, who's not been affected by the spell. That's like the Buddha, who's neither the appearance and nor the grasping onto things existing that way. So that's how the example is usually given, just to give you a short kind of explanation. But that is different to the rope and the snake. The example is used differently. The rope and snake example is meant to show that phenomena are merely labeled, but just as you label snake on a rope, and that snake cannot be found, in the same way, when you label snake on the body of a snake, that snake can't be found. Anyway, I'll say a little bit more about this. Rinpoche presented some reasoning by someone called Changkya Rölpai Dorjé that Rinpoche went through quite quickly, but they're quite interesting just to challenge you. Okay, so I'll say a little bit more about that. But Rinpoche, of course, also mentioned the 5 main texts by Lama Zopa on the Middle Way, and they're all available in English now. So the last one has just been published. which is Illumination of the Intent. That's just been translated and published. So you have Ocean of Reasoning, the commentary on Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom by Lama Tsongkhapa, available in English for quite a few years now, called Ocean of Reasoning. As I just said, Illumination of the Intent. That's Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on Chandakirti's Entry into the Middle Way. That's also available now. Like I said, Essence of Eloquence has been around for quite a few years. It's not specifically a commentary on a particular text, like the first two I mentioned were based on Nagarjuna's and the second on Chandakirti's text, but it deals with the three wheels of Dharma that the Buddha taught, and then distinguishes between those teachings that are interpretative and those that are definitive. Drawing that distinction also very important, and it gives a very important explanation on emptiness in that context. And then you have the last two, so Essence of Eloquence, that's the third commentary, also available in English, and then you have the special insight sections of the Great Lamrim and the Middling Lamrim. Okay, and Rinpoche, a lot of his explanations are based on the Lamrim, so he did talk about, he gave different reasonings, but they're all actually from the Great Lamrim, except this one text by Jan Gawelotro, which is not available in English. He based his analysis on that. It's called the Analysis of the View, but it's only available in English, in Tibetan. Anyway, but what Rinpoche also stressed was these scriptures are no proof for emptiness. They're not a proof. They present certain reasonings, but even they are not a proof, strictly speaking. So when you learn philosophy, what you learn is a proof is only a proof when the person towards the proof is directed has laid all the groundwork, has done all the groundwork. Okay, so if you tell a person who's never heard of emptiness and dependent arising, well, this doesn't exist inherently, this table doesn't exist inherently because it's dependently arisen, they don't know what you're talking about. And even someone who knows about these ideas, there's a certain understanding that phenomena are dependently arisen, for instance, that needs to precede that, understanding that whatever is dependently arisen must lack inherent existence. So certain understanding has to be there, some ground, like in a sense of groundwork or preparatory work. And once that understanding is there, then the reasoning becomes a proof. Previously, yeah, you call it a proof, it's called that, but it only becomes a proof if the person does something with it. So the scriptures are no proof. They present the reasoning, they present that which will become a proof, but it's up to us to do something with it, to think about it, to meditate on it. And I'll go a little bit through the meditation Rinpoche offered yesterday. So just to remind you, there's so much initiative, so much coming from your own side. I mean, studying is the first step. There's so much more that we need to do with the material we learn about. And as a preparatory activity, I mean, before you engage in that groundwork, in order for these reasonings to become really effective to your mind, there's three other things that Lama Tsongkhapa has taught while being instructed by Manjushri, as you remember, supplicating your Lama as being, well, first of all, seeing your Lama as inseparable from the Buddha, inseparable from the meditational deity. She mentioned both. So if you're not a tantric practitioner, as inseparable from the Buddha or all Buddhas. So your Lama, and Rinpoche stressed it should be a fully qualified Lama. Don't just choose an ordinary person, but someone who's fully qualified. And he stressed the mental aspect. It's the mind. So these are the mental qualities that we're connecting to. I've mentioned it, I think, before, this connection to a Lama. You don't need to be able to see that person, meet that person all the time. Just receiving teachings through material like books and so forth, and then connecting with them in a spiritual way, in a mental way, following their advice and so forth. So we need to do this, connecting with this living person, and to not see the Buddha separate from this qualified teacher. And moreover, accumulate merit, purify negativity is extremely important. So only learning about emptiness is only going to take us that far. And then we have the different reasons, 5 main reasons mentioned in the text, but Rinpoche said there's so many more. And you can divide them up, you can further divide them. So therefore, dependent arising, of course, Rinpoche spoke a lot about that. But in particular, and that's also mentioned in the text, in the text Recognizing My Mother, I believe it's verse 8 or 9, it mentions the reasoning of being not inherently one and not inherently different. Oh yeah, but verse 8. So in verse 8, it mentions, well, not explicitly, but implicitly, the 4 points. Remember, she went through them in great detail. No need to go through them in that detail again. You find this, I don't remember the exact page numbers, but if you look at if you have the Lamrim, the Great Lamrim, and it's actually available for free now. You can find it online. You can find PDF copies online of the great treatise. When I translate, I call it just the Great Lamrim because there's no time to say the full name in English, but I think it's called the Treatise of the Stages, the Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment, or the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. That's the full title. It's been translated, Lama Tsongkhapa's great commentary. The special insight section is in the 3rd volume. As I said, I believe, I downloaded it for free. I found it as a PDF file. And if you take especially the 3rd volume, I think it's around page 290, around that section where it talks about, it starts before that, and then it goes on to go through these 4 points: identifying the object of negation, determining the pervasion, and then understanding that the I, for example, is not inherently one with its parts, or it's not one with its parts and not inherently different. Now, what Rinpoche talked about in that context, he spoke about something that practically is really important. Rinpoche mentioned the meditative session and the post-meditative session. And that's something I'd like to repeat again because I thought it was so important. What Rinpoche spoke about was first you go through these 4 points until after you've gone through all 4, you actually come to the conclusion, such an I, the way it appears to me, not just as a label, not just as merely labeled, but as if existing in and of itself. Such an I just can't be found. It's not there. And when you've come to this conclusion, usually the words that are used, the terminology that is used, it comes with a feeling, but that feeling is not necessarily explained. Rinpoche used the word, you come to that conclusion, like you're determined. It's a decisive conclusion. So a feeling where you're deeply moved, like at this insight, you've just come to this insight. And I think we all know when you suddenly understand something and it hits you, it kind of hits you and you go, oh, that's it, right? It comes along with a strong emotional sense, a sense of enthusiasm, a sense of being moved. I don't know how to put it into words. Like I said, I think we all know what that feels like. It's just this kind of, oh, that's it. I get it. So this is what you're trying to reach, this kind of state where it hits you, it moves you, and you go. I mean, it can actually happen outside of the meditative state. You could just be doing something else. And because you've done all the groundwork, because you've gone through these 4 points as Rinpoche explained them and so forth, and of course the 3 preparatory practices of supplicating the Lama and so forth, having done that, it may just hit you in the middle of nowhere. But the point is here that it hits you. In particular, in the meditative session, if you're in the meditative session, you get a sense of the I is not there. It's just not there. Now, that will fade, that enthusiasm, that feeling of being hit, being deeply moved, that will wane naturally. It's just how our mind works. It will slowly grow weaker. And what Rinpoche stressed was, don't let it just fade totally away. Don't let it just fade and get out of the meditation and then start again later. Don't do that. But rather, and I'm putting words into Rinpoche's mouth, he didn't say literally get up and do this and such, but he actually meant like, don't forget about it. But when it slightly wanes, when it wanes, then bring it back up again. Go back to this state of enthusiasm, of like being hit, being well moved and so forth. Go back to it. Go quickly through these, whatever brought this about. So in the case of the 4 points, this was the example. If you understand the non-existence of such an inherent I, if you understand that based on those 4 points, it could also be dependent arising. I mean, it can be different reasons in different sessions, whatever it is, but using it based on this example here of the 4 points. So you try to bring it back, get your mind back into that enthusiastic state, and then it'll wane again. You focus on that, actually. You focus on that enthusiasm, like it's, you focus on that conclusion you've come to, in other words. So not on
Did we lose Geshe?
Yes.
Okay, everybody. Yeah, I think we lost Geshe for a moment. She will come back very quickly. She sometimes has some glitches in her internet. Okay, everybody, we lost Geshe for a moment. Just hang in. I'm sure she will be back in a sec. Thank you. Hi, Geshe, can you hear me?
Someone needs to unmute me. Oh, yes. Okay, great. Okay, sorry for that. Our internet is down right now. I just had to open like a hotspot. Okay. I'll probably be quickly gone for a few seconds after a minute or so because the hotspot is not very good, but they're fixing it right now. Okay, great. So sorry for that. What was I talking about? I don't know how much you missed from what I said because I kept talking until I realized you were all gone. What was the last thing I said? Or what was the last thing?
Rinpoche is stressing the feeling not to let go, and somewhere in that sentence you got lost, Geshe.
That's it? You only heard me saying the feeling for the first time? Okay.
No, you gave some examples what that feeling could be, and then Rinpoche is stressing to hold on to it. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, anyway, as Rinpoche said that, you bring it back again and again. You go back. You focus on, of course, emptiness in that moment, but you return to that enthusiasm again and again. And once you're done with that, once you've finished, or you feel like you've done enough, then you rise from the meditative session and now make a point, as in, well, Rinpoche, the way he put it was like, it's unavoidable that things appear to you. They appear to you, and Rinpoche didn't use the word inherently existent, but later asked for permission when Rinpoche answered the question to add that word, because it wasn't maybe clear to everyone that things still appear inherently. And so inherently, when things appear inherently, to remember, I know they don't exist that way. You become like the magician now, who's not fooled by the appearance. In that sense, remember, they're just like this magical apparition. They don't exist that way. They appear in a way in which they don't exist. So in that way, you keep whatever you've found in the meditative session, you keep that present. You keep it present, even though everything around you seems to suggest phenomena exist inherently. But you're not fooled by that. You remind yourself over and over, which is taking whatever you've learned in the meditative session now also into your everyday life. And of course, that's the whole point of meditating. There's other ways in which it affects you, but that is as per the instructions Rinpoche gave. All right. So that was something I wanted to stress again. I thought that was really beautiful. And of course, we also talked about dependent arising, combining, and Rinpoche didn't stress that. I spoke about this in a context of another great master, Geshe Thupten Pesang, who talks about, again, he also stresses this feeling, this really strong feeling of being moved after coming to the conclusion the I is not there. And of course, reviving that over and over, bringing it back, but also bringing independent arising towards the end of it, remembering things exist in dependence. And then, of course, arising from the meditative state and being like the magician, or seeing everything as like a magical illusion or magical apparition. All right, so that's something I wanted to repeat. And then another thing something else Rinpoche did, and he went through it quite quickly, and that was Changkya Rölpai Dorjé, and the Tibetan master from around the 14th, 15th century. I don't think there's anything available in English except you may be familiar with this text, this book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It's called, I think, the Essence of the Heart, or the Heart of the Essence, which is His Holiness's commentary on the Heart Sutra. So if you Google His Holiness Dalai Lama Heart Sutra, well, you'll definitely find it. And in there's a short commentary on the Heart Sutra. I think it's towards the end of the book, a short translation, English translation of the Heart Sutra by Changkya Rölpai Dorjé. So I believe this is the only. Ist wieder da. Sorry. Ja, danke. Ich nutze jetzt meine Aldi-Karte. Danke. Yeah, danke. Sorry, that was just my brother-in-law trying to fix the internet. Anyway, so that's the only text I'm aware of, as in it has been translated into English. Okay, but what he used here, the text he used here is called, I mentioned it before, the analysis of the view. And here he presents it as a real challenge. So for those of you who are not that familiar with emptiness, it's almost like you've got some understanding of emptiness and then he's pulling the rug underneath your feet. It feels a little bit like that. Well, in particular, when it comes to conventional existence, how do things exist? Anyway, it's interesting. I found it very interesting, so I thought to go through it again. So what does he say? What does Changkya Rölpai Dorjé say? Well, first of all, he asks, how do we know something exists? So we talk about phenomena existing independence. They're dependently arisen. So they're merely labeled. That's what it means. They're merely labeled. But whatever is merely labeled, does it necessarily exist? And the answer is no. Because even if you take a rope and you mistakenly label it to be a snake, well, you're merely labeling. But that doesn't mean you actually have a snake when you mistakenly label snake on the basis of a rope. In comparison to a snake body, you label snake correctly. So how do you distinguish between one being correct and one not being correct? Now, ordinarily, the answer is because it performs. One performs the function of a snake and the other one doesn't. And so Changkya Rölpai Dorjé, he challenges that. He says, well, how do you know it performs the function? For the mind of the person who perceives the rope to be a snake, to them, that's how it appears. Because when you ask this question, does it perform the function of a snake or not? Well, in the case of the rope, that function, does it exist in and of itself, or is it merely appearing to the mind? And of course, the answer is merely appearing to the mind. So the person who's mistaken, the function of a snake is appearing, whereas to the person who's mistaken, well, this rope seems to be performing the function of a snake, whereas for the other person, well, they're correct, of course. The person who correctly labels snake on the snake body, well, anyway, the function is perceived correctly. So he already uses that. He kind of says, well, what does that really mean with the function? Okay. And then he asks, the second point that he suggests is, well, you could argue it is unavoidable. It's certain. It's for certain that a snake body appears as a snake, but that's not true for the rope and the snake. It's not certain that to everyone it appears that way. But you can still, you can argue, well, to the person who's in that kind of darkened room and there's this rope that is speckled and it's coiled in a certain way, well, it will always appear. It's certain to a particular person. Again, it will always appear to them, just as a snake body always appears as a snake to another person, or maybe it doesn't always appear as a snake to another person. So again, that's not enough. Okay. His third argument is, or this third point is, well, you could say that the rope doesn't exist as a snake because it's not the basis of imputation for a snake, whereas the actual snake, the snake body, is the basis of imputation. That's the third argument. But again, he says, well, to that person who's mistaken, it is. Just to the other person, it isn't. So that doesn't decide anything. And then Changkya Rölpai Dorjé says, well, let's look at what Lama Tsongkhapa says. Lama Tsongkhapa, in his insight section on the Lamrim, on the Great Lamrim, part of the 5 texts I mentioned early on, he talks about 3 characteristics that something needs to have in order to exist, to conventionally exist. The first one, it needs to be known in the world. It needs to be something that is renowned, that is known, that people perceive to be the case. And then the second characteristic or feature is it should not be contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. So a mind that perceives a conventional truth the way it exists. And it should also not be contradicted by a mind that realizes emptiness. But that characteristic doesn't need to be mentioned here in this context. So Rinpoche focused on, not Rinpoche, Changkya Rölpai Dorjé, he focused on this mind, this conventional valid cognizer, that it doesn't contradict, it shouldn't contradict whatever is there. Okay, so you have the person who's mistaken, perceiving a rope as a snake. You have a person who's not mistaken, perceiving perceiving a snake body as a snake. And you've got a third person coming there, or maybe one of those two at a later point, checking it out. Checking, is there really a snake or not? So coming along and switching on the light and seeing, well, there is no snake. Or as Rinpoche explained it, waiting until the sun rises, and with the sunshine, you see this is actually a rope, it's not an actual snake. So that would be an example of a conventional valid cognizer contradicting this perception of the rope as a snake. And based on that, you can see, oh, it's not an actual snake. Whereas in the other case, it is an actual snake. All right. But then Rinpoche says, well, but then how do you know this is a correct mind? Or Changkya Rölpai Dorjé argues, how do you know it's a correct mind? How do you know when the light goes out again? Well, when the sun sets, so when it gets dark again, this is not a correct mind, right? And so he's like going, wow, how do you determine something is a correct mind or not? And then Rinpoche went as far as saying, and that's basically how he finished, he said, like, well, and then if you consider the fact that due to people's karma, some people perceive the same object and see it completely differently. The example being a bowl of liquid. For a human being, it's water. For a preta being, for example, is pus and blood. So who's right and who's wrong? And so here it becomes really difficult to even determine conventional truth. Well, there is definitely a way, and Rinpoche didn't mention that, but I thought it was great how he challenged, especially those who are more familiar with these ideas, challenging them to even conventional existence, that it's not that easy to posit them. And I guess for us also a reminder that we come with the sense there's a concrete, inherent conventional truth, and try to get something very concretely there because we're so used to the sense of inherent existence, concrete existence, and to remind us, well, conventional existence, none of this concreteness is there to be found. So rather, as society, as a group of people, okay, and we're not talking about preta beings or celestial beings, no, as human beings, we have a similar appearance of certain objects, and we have agreed on a particular animal having certain features and so forth. Based on that, we call it a snake. And so we call that a snake based on this basis of imputation. Is that snake to be found within the parts of these aggregates of a snake? No, there is no snakeness found. As it appears to us, after we label it, we believe there's really something there, although it was just labeled. But in actuality, it's merely labeled based on these conventions that we share. And since these conventions are not applied to a rope, because a rope doesn't have these aggregates, it's not the aggregates of a snake performing a certain function, being a basis of having a certain, or servant therefore as a basis of imputation for snake. Since that is not given, as a group, we can determine one is mistaken and one is not. So in that sense, that's all. There's not more to phenomena being merely labeled. Anyway, so that was an interesting argument I thought Rinpoche gave at the very end. And this part I wanted to mention once again. This was just a brief summary of Rinpoche's teachings yesterday. He didn't go through the text, but I thought just to wrap it up, and before I take questions, quickly to go through the text again, just in a few words, not in the same way as I did before, so that, well, you won't forget easily. And of course, Rinpoche's whole message with whatever he said was, we need to practice this. This is the only way to really to make this text most meaningful, is to practice it. He didn't put it into those words, but I believe just his instructions on how to meditate on this, well, that's what was, that with this he implied that that's what we're supposed to do with this particular text here. Anyway, it uses a lot of analogies. It describes the mind, our own mind, if you like, if you apply it to yourself, like a lunatic child. Like a child, our mind is like a child. We're childish, we do childish things, lunatic things, because we are affected by our misapprehension. And in actuality, this lunatic child, now, if we really practice, we're looking for our old mother. Mother here being emptiness, which is inseparable from the child. And so important, we need, just as we need our mother in everyday life, first of all, our mother is important for our existence, giving birth to us, but also important for our well-being. So likewise, we can say emptiness, well, if things didn't lack inherent existence, we couldn't exist. Nothing could exist. So existence is only possible because of emptiness, because they lack inherent existence. And emptiness is responsible for our well-being. Why? Because since the root of all our trouble is the misperception of reality, which is just another way of saying perceiving the opposite of emptiness. Instead of understanding phenomena lack inherent existence, we strongly hold on to the inherent existence of phenomena. And therefore, understanding emptiness is responsible for our well-being. If we want to get rid of all our trouble, well, trying to change the world around us is not going to do it. We need to change that mind. We need to eliminate that mind, the mind that perceives phenomena to exist inherently. How do we eliminate it? By generating the mind that realizes emptiness, that phenomena do not exist in that way. And in that way, we can slowly, strengthening that mind, we can slowly remove this wrong apprehension. Okay, so in this way, just as our mother, we need her for our existence, we need her for our well-being. Well, we need emptiness for our existence and for our well-being, in the way just described. And the brother, dependent arising on a coarser kind of level, not on the subtlest level, but on the coarser level, gives us a cue. It hints at the lack of inherent existence. Okay, so therefore, emptiness is too subtle for us right now to understand without a reason, without some hint, without a cue, without a sign that phenomena cannot exist in that way. And that sign, in this case, the brother, dependent arising, as that reasoning here, dependent arising, well, that will lead us in the right direction. Okay, and so the brother quietly speaks to us how phenomena really exist, because based on this dependent arising, we won't have a direct understanding of emptiness right away, but quietly, that is conceptually, come to understand emptiness. And also come to understand that everything is a manifestation of the mother's gentle smile. Everything is possible because of emptiness. Birth and death, that is samsara, well, they're the mother's deceptive words. In other words, these objects around us, even the conventional truth that are only possible because of our mother, because of emptiness, well, we are being deceived in the sense, not that they're really deceptive themselves, but our minds allows itself to be deceived by their actual mode of existence, because they appear to us in the way in which they don't exist because of our basic misapprehension. And our undeceiving mother, well, our undeceiving mother, emptiness herself, exists the way, appears the way it exists. So when you realize emptiness, you won't be fooled by that. If you realize emptiness directly, there's no mistaken appearance. But she still betrays me. Okay, betrays me, of course, not really that she betrays us, but rather we allow ourselves to be betrayed by her, because karma and afflictions, which are only just possible because there's emptiness, I mean, nothing could exist unless it lacked inherent existence, but karma and afflictions give us so much trouble. But fortunately, we are saved by the brother, because although we don't recognize our mother right now, the brother dependent arising, that coarser level of dependent arising, it'll move us in the right direction. And it is why do we need to know this? And as I mentioned before, the root of all our problems is self-grasping, holding on to inherent existence. So our hope is mother dependent arising. And she's important. Well, liberation could only be possible if phenomena don't exist inherently. If they exist inherently, nothing could be changed. And of course, we need to realize our mother, and that's the way out. And if phenomena, hypothetically, if they existed inherently, no one could help us. No Buddha, nothing. No one could help us. We could never attain liberation. So this is what the text tells us. And so this changing environment is basically an expression of our mother's gentle smile. It's the expression of our mother, or it's her gentle smile. So there's definitely a way out. So how do we find this way out? Well, understanding that this mother who's actually inexpressible, emptiness is actually inexpressible, but we can still come to understand it, that emptiness itself doesn't exist inherently, but conventionally exists within everything. And it exists in mutual dependence with dependent arising, the deeper level of dependent arising. So here the Father, the deepest level of dependent arising, including dependently arisen phenomena that are the basis for emptiness. So all the objects around us dependently arisen, merely labeled. So that is the Father who indirectly benefits us. Of course, dependent arising indirectly, because what we need to directly realize, of course, is the mother. That's the way to totally eliminate self-grasping directly. But of course, with the help of the Father, which those two are in mutual agreement, or they're mutually dependent on each other. Without emptiness, you couldn't have dependent arising, and vice versa. Plus, understanding one depends on understanding the other. So they're very important, those two, inseparably linked. And that's why it says, if I look for my Father, conventional truth that are dependently risen, I find him in my mother's lap. I find him in the sphere of emptiness. That's how my parents saved me. They saved me because I come to understand this union of calm abiding and special insight. And so how do I come to realize that? Well, and that's verse 8, as mentioned before, by way of, for instance, the four, dependent arising is one important aspect, one important reasoning, but also the reasoning of phenomena not existing as one with their parts or inherently different from their parts, as described by way of these 4 points. And no need to go over them again, but that's what verse 8 describes. And then verse 9 is telling us, well, and we can do this all ourselves based on the teachings by Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and Lama Tsongkhapa. We don't need to go and search here and there. No, it's all there. It's all there in these precious texts, and they've been translated into, well, English at least, and many other languages. So these texts are available to us. It's just a matter of studying them, contemplating them, and meditating on them. But the author also warns us, we need to be careful. It's difficult to realize this. So it sounds pretty easy, but there's a lot of things we need to be careful about, mainly our own wrong views, of course. And so he again then gives a very extensive explanation. Well, first of all, he talks about the lower philosophical systems other than the Prasangika, which are seen as really, really helpful. Helpful in different ways. On one hand, they introduce us to certain ideas already, but they also hold wrong views that are helpful when they're spelled out, when they're described to us. When we learn about them, we may recognize that we have those same wrong views that we just weren't aware of. There's so much happening in our mind, so many mistaken views we're not aware of. Therefore, studying these lower systems help us to gain a better understanding. So he says, well, look at the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika, the two lower philosophical systems. They talk of this external, they do say the self doesn't exist the way it appears on a kind of coarser level. And Rinpoche spoke about this in a previous class. No need to go over this again. But in terms of the external world, the external environment, that external environment, that seems to, they say it exists truly the way it appears to us as an objective truth out there. That's the way it exists in reality. That's their assertion. So there's a truly existing external environment, objective, truly existing environment. And they also, some of these philosophers would even claim you have these partless particles, these smallest particles, smallest building blocks that are not made of parts. And they all come together to create this world. Okay, now that is totally refuted by the higher school. So you have the Chittamatra, for instance, who say, oh, no way do you have an external, objectively, inherently, truly existent environment, because there is no external existence. They say only the mind exists truly inherently. All right, and that's the Chittamatra school. And then you have the Svatantrika who say, well, there is nothing that exists truly. There's nothing that exists objectively. Things still exist inherently. There's still something from the side of the object, but there's no objective existence or true existence. Things exist interdependently, yes, but and inherently as well, but not in the way just said. So it's taking us closer to the Prasangika, but of course the Prasangika even denies inherent existence. All right. So, and then later on, the author says, well, but we can still learn from them. Look, I mean, I do talk about external existence, and we're not denying external existence in general, conventionally exists. And in terms of the Chittamatra school, mind and its object, we learn from them. Imprints being responsible for the things we see, etc. None of that is denied. That aspect we learned from them. And of course, in the Svatantrika school, the emphasis on dependent arising. Well, we won't deny that. So we do learn something from them, he says. Then the author also goes into the non-Gelugpa schools. Oh no, he does talk about the Gelugpa school. I forgot to mention that. He kind of warns of the danger, in particular following the Gelugpa system, where there's more emphasis on the existence of conventional truth, that we may fall into the extreme of nihilism, extreme of reification, in that we don't deny enough. We believe emptiness to be separate from our appearances. It turns into some kind of monster, and in the end, it's just words, and we lose the plot. We won't find the mother. We just become maybe scholars and very eloquent in what we do, but we never find the mother. Our mother's gone in the meantime. So he warns of that, as I just said. And then I got a little bit confused with the order here. Then he presents the four philosophical systems, as I just did. The four, like the Vaibhashika, Sautrantrika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamika Svatantrika. And then he says, well, there are the other Tibetan Buddhist traditions, and their emphasis is more on emptiness. And if that's misunderstood, same problem as with the Gelugpa school, if it's misunderstood, you fall to an extreme, and in that case, it may be the extreme of nihilism. Anyway, be careful, watch out, try to really follow the instructions to the point, and so forth. And in verse 20 then, having done all this, so he no need to go into all the details, but in verse 20, he says, well, what I just said was only directed at those who are interested in scholarship, who don't really practice thoroughly what they've learned. And I didn't want to cause offense. I have the deepest respect for all these different traditions, in particular the traditions here, Nyingma Sakya Kayu. I'm just using that as a warning, just to be careful to follow the traditions properly. And then in verse 21, he basically said, well, what I've done personally, is I followed the teachings of Nagarjuna, of Chandakirti, the well-bred horse of their teachings. That's how I did it. That's what I did. And I hope to then overcome the challenging passage, which is the obstructions to liberation, the obstructions to enlightenment. I hope to overcome them through this process, having learned, contemplated, and meditated on what is taught by Nagarjuna and so forth. And of course, telling us we should do the same thing, follow the basics, like these basic teachings, and then act accordingly, listening, contemplating, and meditating. And then in terms of what do you find then in verse 22, what do you find? Well, there's no search required somewhere else. Look at your own experience, your own mind. Enlightenment is not found somewhere else in some different place and so forth. It's found within our own mind. So the solution, everything is right here. We have everything here. We talk about Buddha nature as in like everything we have to become enlightened. We have all the ingredients here. We just need to liberate the mind from that which is in the way to becoming liberated and enlightened. So look at the nature of the mind, look at the nature of the phenomena. Don't hold on to conventional truth as ultimate truth, because they don't exist the way they appear, but do not totally let go of them. Do not. So that would be falling into the extreme. The first is falling into the extreme of, so never grasp at the true, never grasp at conventional phenomena as being an ultimate truth. That would be the extreme of reification, making things more solid and concrete than they are. They don't exist absolutely. They only exist in relation or relatively. But don't deny their existence altogether. So do not shun them. These phenomena that appear one way but exist in a different way, because they're still a conventional truth. And in that way, you will be able to rest within the middle way, free from nothingness and an absolute existence of things. So this is how we should go about it. And in that way, we may see our mother directly. And so he says, he himself, the author, hasn't seen his mother directly, hasn't perceived emptiness directly yet, but through just hearing the words, just conceptually understanding them, it's like it's come closer to me. They're right here with me. And of course, based on that conceptual understanding, what follows is a direct experience. And then what's left is gratitude, because we haven't done it on our own. He hasn't done it on his own. We won't do it on our own. It's dependence on the great masters, our spiritual teacher, and so forth. So kindness of Nagarjuna, Losang Chakpa, his own guru. So in that way, I will practice this and offer this to all of them. And all that's left is then to dedicate the merit in verse 25. So having done this, having worked ceaselessly and worked towards analyzing and realizing emptiness, through this, I dedicate this, of course, towards the deeds of a bodhisattva, towards enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And lastly, well, rejoicing, to be joyful about what has been reached. So this is a little unusual to have this kind of verse of happiness and joy. But basically, I think something that, especially in the West, I believe is so important, that part of our practice should be this joy. I mean, we found something so precious. There's so many reasons to be joyful, having this precious human birth, so many opportunity, one reason to be so joyful. And then secondly, having found the Dharma, which is the means, having met our mother, although we're not really able to recognize her as such maybe, but still having encountered this, having found this. And again, so much reason to be joyful. And joy plays a huge part. I mean, it goes as far as in Tantra, you have great bliss, which is just an exaggerated form of joy. So joy is seen as important as in, well, in the tantric system, when you practice this great bliss, actually making the mind very concentrated and focused, that's very effective. But leaving aside Tantra, just on a daily basis, because our afflictive emotions lead to a lot of suffering, frustration, depression, and so forth. And we need to find back this joy, appreciating what we found, what we have. And then with this light mind, joyful mind, we can practice the Dharma effectively. So as Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo says, well, we need a seventh perfection, which is humor. Well, humor and joy. I mean, to be able to laugh about ourselves, our own mistakes, to not take ourselves too seriously and take things in a light way. Well, that connects to that kind of joy, I believe. And Tibetans are a good example for that, because they're definitely very joyous and humorous people. So it's something we can take as a good example. And anyway, that being the last verse, so Changkya Rölpai Dorjé, he really expresses his joy through talking about this ecstatic dance he's performing at his place where he's meditating at Wutaishan, the 5-peak mountain actually in China, quite famous, being an abode of, or being a place of Manjushri, associated with wisdom. And that's it. So yes, there it says that these are it's actually called the melodies of an echo. That's probably the original, what's it called, name of this text. And now it's called Recognizing My Mother. It was composed by Changkya Rölpai Dorjé and so forth. The scribe was Bhikshu Gelik Namkha. And that's it. That's the text we just studied. And I hope it's become clear. Of course, Rinpoche gave such eloquent explanations, and I hope with this review class I was able to go through some of those points again. And we finished just in time to have some questions. Okay. All right. Could you still hear me? Because was everything clear? Okay, good. Okay, yes. Great. So let's have some questions. Yes, Alicia.
Alicia. Please unmute, Alicia.
Yes. Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Geshe, for these very precious teachings. I would like to know something very practical. How to connect all these precious teachings, emptiness, in our daily life. Once we are in meditation, and when we understand that phenomena doesn't exist inherently. Once we see the misperception of reality, that things appears, but not in the way we see, etc., etc. And then go into these 4 points that Rinpoche explained yesterday and to clarify today. After seeing all these, and then in post-meditation, in the perfect way that we can reach that, in my case, in the best way that I can reach that point. How to connect this when the things that happen in war, for example, disease, war, sickness. Now we are seeing what is going on in Afghanistan, for example, that the terrible hardship, people dying, and etc., etc. How to connect these valuable things, that is emptiness in Buddhism, to these things,
to these situations. Understand? Yes, yes. Well, that's really important. That's of course a really important question.
But for me, it's very important to know, to clarify.
Yes. No. I'm glad you do, because that's the whole point. I mean, if it's just a nice philosophical system, yeah, well, great. Maybe instead of, I don't know, going to a movie, you may just do this as a hobby. But it shouldn't be a hobby. We shouldn't be hobby Buddhists, as in like once a day or once a week we do a little bit of Buddhism and then we go back to our everyday life. No, we need to bring it into our everyday life. And the newer we are to this, the newer everything is, the harder it is to bring into our life, obviously. So the more advanced you are, the easier it becomes. Now, just taking it from the point of view, we're all beginners. So for us, it's still very, very difficult. And in terms of our own life, so forgetting about the situation in this world first, I'll address that in a moment. But let's start with our own everyday kind of life. How can we take this emptiness? Well, assuming you have a sense that phenomena do not exist as concretely as they appear to us. I think that's kind of the basic understanding we have all come to based on what Rinpoche taught, right? That phenomena appear to be very solid and concrete out there, totally independent of our own mind, but in reality, they don't exist that way. Based on that, just in everyday life, we'll experience a lot of challenges. I mean, our life is full of challenges. And what happens is, as an example, I see a situation and I say, oh, it's a problem. That's a problem. So my mind labels problem. But as it seems, it doesn't seem that my mind is just labeled problem on a basis of imputation, right? That it was just labeled. No, it seems, oh no, it is a problem in and of itself. And I've only called it a problem because it is one. That's how it seems, right? So actually, a problem is merely labeled. And on that basis of imputation, just as an example, I could also label challenge, right? I could label on that same situation, oh, a challenge. Okay, so is it in and of itself a problem or in and of itself a challenge? Neither. It's neither. I can impute it, I can label, well, there's a certain, I won't label it a blissful experience. No, because that's not what happens. It's got no basis to say that. But to believe it's a problem in and of itself, it makes it so solid that I'm now a victim of this problem, right? I feel like I'm just hit by this situation. But to understand, I'm just labeling it. I'm labeling it on a basis that is constantly changing, that I may label a problem today, and then that basis, as it's very fluent, we haven't discussed impermanence so much yet, but of course that's part of it. We label things, we label it problem, and the moment we call it problem, believe it's solidly a problem, it seems to be unchanging. But there's in that moment, yeah, there's a challenge, but it's changing already. It's already changing into something else. So to understand that these things that seem problem, good, bad, and so forth, the way we perceive things are so solidly understanding they're changing all the time, and we're labeling them. It's to our mind, and we have a lot of freedom also in the way we can label certain things. All right, that's just with just as an example in everyday life. And of course, with regard to I just used the problem, but another person, I label this person idiot because I've done something, but just based on a certain behavior. But then they have so many good qualities. So once I've labeled them idiot, it seems they're an idiot from their own side. And I don't allow myself to see this person in a different light, to realize I've just labeled them idiot on the basis of something they've done, but there's so much more to this person. And so to let go of this, holding on to this label, or someone I don't like, for instance. So I've labeled, I don't like this person. And it seems this is a person I dislike. And every time I meet this person, it's not like I labeled them that way yesterday. No, this is really someone I don't like. This is an enemy. And again, it doesn't allow us to be more kind, more compassionate, and to remind ourselves, okay, I've labeled this person, but maybe there's more to it. It appears that way to me, but there's other people who love this person, who see positive aspects. So to see whether I can also find that affection and care towards that person. So in that way, it can be helpful. And of course, the situation in Afghanistan, on a conventional level, yes, it's definitely terrible what people are going through. So I'm not saying that this is non-existent. Of course, it's happening. fortunately it's also changing. And in terms of the situation, we often look at it as like this huge disaster, as if it was this intrinsic disaster. But of course, it's individuals. It's like the summary of individual people's problems. And the good thing, of course, it will stop at some point. And because they don't exist, the people experiencing these problems don't exist as solid, independent entities as they appear. I can interact. I can make a difference. So I can actually maybe reach out. And there's only a limit in what I can do, but I can do something, because they don't exist as inherent problems that are unchanging and inherently just a problem. No, I can help. I can possibly make an effort and maybe go out of my comfort zone and try to help in some way, because things are fluent, they're changing, they're not static. And because of interdependence, I can interact them. And that may encourage me actually to help, but also be patient with my help not immediately having an effect, and maybe not having an obvious effect. But because of the interdependence, it's impossible that it just gets lost, right? So in that way, and these are just a few examples, and you need to, well, it can only provide you with examples. So now it's up to you to take that step out of the Dharma world into your everyday world. Because Dharma, the word for Buddhism, is also the word for reality. The Dharma is just telling us reality, and to seek that reality in your everyday life, especially when there are problems in our interaction with other people. Whenever there's a problem in particular, try to find how this idea, phenomena don't exist the way they appear, that they're merely labeled, that our subjective mind is part of this. Start with this and see whether it makes a difference. It takes out some of the heaviness that just pulls us down, that depresses us, to start off with. Okay, that would be one way I could suggest. Okay,
very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. All right, Christine. I think it's Christine first, right?
Can you unmute?
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I hope it's okay asking this question, but it's to more clearly understand the teachings on emptiness. Mm-hmm. May I know which lineages yourself and Yangten Rinpoche follow?
What do you mean with lineage? Do you mean like which Tibetan tradition of the Geluk Nyingma Sakya?
It's having listened to the explanations of, I think it was verses 10. No, it was further on, about 15, about how the different lineages can interpret things differently. Right. So if you're reading books, you need to know where they're coming from as to how to interpret what you're reading.
Okay. Well, Yangten Rinpoche and myself were mainly trained in the Geluk tradition. So I don't know whether Yangten Rinpoche, because some lamas, they can be of the Nyingma Sakya and Geluk Kagyu tradition and still study in the Geluk tradition. So I believe traditionally Rinpoche being a reincarnated Lama, I believe also his previous incarnation is rooted in the Geluk tradition, as in like studying mainly this tradition. But I don't know 100%. But as far as I know, he's been trained in Sarah May. So that is a Geluk Center of Education. And I myself, I also follow the Geluk tradition. I did study a little bit of the other traditions, but not enough to be able to say anything about them. It was only a few months as part of the study program that I've followed. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
That's your question. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Next question, Amelia.
Emilia, can you unmute?
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yesterday, so the question I asked Rinpoche on the when meditating on the emptiness of the eye and going on form, it's easy because it's, you know, the body is here. I think I can also, it's okay to do the sensation and even perception, but then when Rinpoche says that, no, you've got to consider all the 5 aggregates, and then I was, how to do it in terms of parts and the being one and outside in relation to mental formation and consciousness. I just don't know how to do that. So how to go about in the meditation, because the body, you go breaking, and even sensations. If I feel anger, I say, well, am I the anger? Am I, you know, is the I outside the anger? Is the I with the anger? It can get there with some reasoning, analytical thinking and so on. But the last 2, I just feel stuck on how to go about it.
All right. So you're talking about the 5 aggregates. The idea, of course, if the I is not separate from mind and body or from the 5 aggregates, it can only be one with them, or as part of the analysis, either one or different. So let's take one as the first object of analysis. And as you said, so the I is not the body. What are the other 4 aggregates? The aggregate of feeling and the aggregate of discrimination or discernment. Those 2 are mentioned separately. Then there's the aggregate of consciousness, just the aspect of the mind of just perceiving its object, whereas feeling and discernment are more specific functions of the mind. And then you have the 5th category, which includes everything that's not mentioned before. So it's neither feeling nor discernment nor the main mind, and also not the body. So all other mental functions plus the imprints and so forth. So all those are included in the last aggregate compositional factor. And you're saying that your main difficulty is with understanding how the I is not consciousness, not that main mind, and it's not the compositional factor, right? Okay.
Well, to meditate.
Pardon? How to meditate. Yes, how to meditate. Yes, of course, how to meditate on that. Well, first of all, it should become clear what consciousness means, right? How does consciousness exist? It's a continuum. It's a continuum in time. It doesn't have spatial parts. It doesn't have a right side and a left side. Obviously, it's non-physical, but it's a continuum in time. And sometimes it's very calm, and sometimes it's very excited. Sometimes it's very coarse. Sometimes it's very subtle. Okay. Sometimes it goes along with a strong sense of I exist, and other times there's just no sense of I to the mind itself. Okay. Sometimes it's in a very subtle state while we're asleep, or during a dream state, while during a deep sleep state or a dream state, or when we're fainting. And at other times it's awake, that kind of consciousness. It's on a coarser level. So first of all, the question is, if the I is that consciousness, is that I, like, for instance, when there's no sense of I at all while we're like sleeping, okay, but the consciousness is still there. So is the I lost in that moment, or is just that mind itself, is that deep mind, is that the I itself? Because it feels like when we wake up, well, the I just wasn't around, but that mind was definitely there. So in that sense, it's like in that moment, it seems like the I is gone somewhere else. When we have like a time gap or what have you, in terms of what just happened the last few hours, I just fainted. So that's just with regard to the feeling we have with regard to the I and then the mind. But besides that, so is it the coarse mind? Is it the subtle mind? Also, mind can be divided into many different parts. It can be divided up into different parts. So when there's a sense, there's the solid I, well, there is no solid consciousness, because these moments in time, these moments of awareness can be endlessly subdivided into little parts, right? And it can be also divided into the aspect that has an appearance, an object appearing to it, into the aspect of perceiving something, right? So the I is a solid entity. It seems very clear. There's this I, the way we're talking about the I, the way it appears to us. So which of these parts of the mind, the fact that something appears to it, that aspect, that it takes on an object. Remember, she talked about its consciousness because it's conscious of something. So this object appears to it. It's got this aspect of something appearing to it. Is that the I? Is it the aspect that perceives its object, or is it the aspect that has something appear to it? Is it the aspect of being able to know its object? It seems like it's none of those. It seems it's none of those. And there are all these different aspects, and you end up with these different aspects. And if the I is all of them, again, you have a problem. And how do you decide? It's just the aspect of knowing its object, or it's just the object of the continuation, the fact that it continues on, or the changeable aspect, right? So here we're actually analyzing the I, the way it appears to us. It's something concrete, solid, a single object. And then the I is constantly changing. To us, it seems that the mind is changing, but the I is the same, right? It seems the same I. That's the same I. Okay, my I when I was 5 years old and the I now, they feel pretty different. Okay, I take that. I accept that. But the I 5 minutes ago, the I this morning, and the I now, they seem the same. How can they be the mind that's been changing all the time? So you see, due to the changes, due to times and the self is the mind is very subtle, and the I seems to be totally gone, and being able to take apart the mind in the way just described. In that way, we come to see it cannot be the aggregates. It cannot be the aggregates, right? Does that help a little bit, the way I've just done it? Okay.
Yes, a lot. Thank you, Geshema.
Sure, you're welcome. Okay, there's Eva. Let's just raise her hand. Please go ahead, Eva. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Can you see me? No,
I can't see you, but I can hear you. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great.
Firstly, I wanted to say thank you to you and everybody involved for this incredibly precious teachings.
Sure.
And I'm extremely happy and overjoyed about how all of us, what we did and how we kept together and what you enabled us to understand. Actually, my question is about the relationship. If we go back about to the text and the analogy about the family, the relation between the brother and the father, which are both interdependent arising, as I understand. Could you please little bit elaborate? So because I feel that it is very important to understand the family relations that are used here. The better we understand, maybe the better it's such a valuable hint on how we can access the emptiness. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Well, I'm not sure I can give you an answer to that, because I don't think that the analogy of the brother and the father goes as far as that understanding them thoroughly will help us with our family relationships, right?
No, that I didn't say. No.
Oh no, you don't mean that. Okay.
No.
No, not that way.
No.
Okay, great. That's good. I'm relieved.
No.
I'm relieved. Yeah. Okay. So, but I don't. You see, the problem is in the commentaries, and Rinpoche said the father and the brother are the same, and I didn't really. Right, he said that, and I don't really agree with that, because why would the author talk about the brother when you talked about the brother as a dependent arising as a reasoning, and the father in terms of the union of emptiness and dependent arising? So I think there's a reason for separating the two, but I didn't find anything in the commentaries, at least the commentaries. I had about 4 commentaries available. In the end, I only used 2 when I put together these explanatory notes, because the other ones were too extensive. But I couldn't find anything that specified it, except that with the brother, the brother, it kept saying the reasoning of dependent arising. Okay, now I believe with the relationship father and mother, it's very interesting, because directly as children, we are mainly dependent for our survival on a physical basis. We are dependent more on our mother. Obviously, mother's womb, of course, the father's semen is also important, but the mother's womb, and then once we were born, the mother's milk, and so forth. So that's very interesting, and I mentioned that before with like, first of all, directly our existence is dependent on her, as in like phenomena couldn't exist if they didn't lack inherent existence, but that's true for the father too. If phenomena weren't independently risen, we couldn't exist. So that part is the same. But also to realize emptiness, we mainly need to realize emptiness to remove the root of all our trouble. The direct realization of dependent arising will not remove all our problems. So in that way, the father is only secondary to our survival. So this is not your question, I know, but it puts the mother in the forefront. Now, taking the father as independent arising, of course, if things didn't exist independently, and of course, if we didn't understand that phenomena existed dependent, we still wouldn't understand emptiness fully. So the father plays a secondary role, but for our survival and for our well-being, extremely important. We need both for survival, but rather as in like pushing us in the right direction. And I think that's also, we learn so much from our siblings in the way they teach us things our parents cannot teach us. So our parents, of course, they're responsible for our survival, and of course they educate us as well. But looking at my niece and nephews, I can see that they learn from each other stuff that they don't learn from their parents. But it's still, they could still exist without the brother. So it's a bit like, once you've used the coarser level, so the brother at some point is important, but eventually you can leave the brother behind. Your parents are somehow important your entire life, but your brother maybe more initially. I don't know. I'm just kind of guessing around here a little bit. But still, the brother is secondary. So important initially, but less important later in terms of learning. But that still doesn't explain this fully. But what I'm trying to say is really the main difference between the father and the brother is dependent arising on its deepest level, that's the father, whereas the brother is only on this coarser level. So playing a secondary role, let's put it that way. Yeah, that's all I can say. I don't think I've given you any extra information. I mean, nothing more than I said already earlier, but maybe it helps a little bit.
It did. Thank you.
Yes, it does. Okay, you're welcome. All right. Okay. Are we with time? I've got 3 minutes left. If there's one more question, maybe we have time for the last question. No last question. That's all right. No problem. No. Okay. Never mind then. Let's wrap it up then. Am I okay with time, Kumbin? Got 3 more minutes, right? Yes. Okay.
Yes, Geshe.
All right. So then I'm not finishing far too early. Okay, great. So let's take these last few minutes to do a meditation together. Meditation together. Maybe the way Rinpoche did it. Let's do the 4 points. If you've got the time, you're welcome to leave, of course, if you don't want to follow this meditation. But since Rinpoche explained it quite extensively, I hope I'm not going to go too long. But let's just do it all together. And once I'm done with the meditation, I'll dedicate the virtue. And as I said, you can just leave this group anytime you wish, or you can remain with us and do the whole meditation. So let's start by first calming the mind. So I'll guide you through the meditation, but first start off with just focus on the breath, do some breathing meditation, mindfulness meditation of the breath, to let go of any disruptive thoughts, any thoughts of yesterday and tomorrow and so forth, to just be concentrated and focus on what is to come. So we'll do a few moments of just focusing on the breath. And then shift your focus on the I. Your sense of self. Does that seem to be merely labeled? Or is there a sense there's something concrete there? That you usually refer to as I. The I that wants to be happy. That wants to be liked. That wants to be successful. Doesn't want to be treated badly and unjustly. And if that I really existed the way it appears to your mind, there's only two possibilities. Either it's the same as the five aggregates, or it's different. So that's the second point after identifying the object of negation, determining that those are the only two possibilities. That's the same as mind and body. That clearly appearing I. Or it is different. And let's take the first option. Consider that. If the I were the same as the 5 aggregates, we would have many I's. Since we have at least 5 aggregates. Could the I be the body? Well, which part of the body? Contradict that our sense of the I controlling the body, the I being the owner of the body. And how could the I be the other aggregates? Feeling, discernment, these are all functions of the mind. So is the I any of those functions? And if it was just the main mind, well, any of the sense consciousnesses or the mental consciousness, since there are 6 main minds. Would it be all 6? And again, leading to the absurdity that there are 6 eyes. And if it was the mental consciousness, well, that is made of many parts, different moments in time. And the aspect of something appearing to the mind, the aspect of the mind apprehending its object, which of those is the I? And if the mind grows very subtle at the time of deep sleep, is the I still that very subtle mind? So therefore, since we don't find an I that is any of the aggregates, the only other option is that it exists separate from mind and body. Which is also the way it usually appears to us as a separate entity. But that would mean we could remove mind and body and still be left with an I. How would that be possible? You would perceive an I without perceiving any of the five aggregates. What kind of I would that be? And how can such an I be the controller, the owner of mind and body? So as a result of having gone through these 4 points, see whether you can come to the conclusion that kind of I does simply not exist. An I that is not merely labeled to mind and body, but existing in its own right, the way it appears to our mind. just cannot be found. Just focus on the absence of that type of I, since it cannot be found. So what does that mean to my self-centeredness? This attachment to I, feeling that I am the center of the universe. My well-being is more important than that of others. If that I doesn't exist. No need to worry about the success, the gain, the popularity, the reputation, the wealth of this I. Instead, there is a merely labeled I, labeled on mind and body. Whose well-being is just as important as everyone else's. And everyone else's being just as important as the well-being of this conventional I. And there's no I that is in the way towards working for the welfare of others. Giving us more peace, but also the space of mind to work towards the benefit of others. And now in conclusion, let's dedicate whatever virtue we've accumulated, having studied the text, recognizing my mother, having contemplated it and meditated on it. May this become a cause for us to attain the fully enlightened state of a Buddha, so that we're able to work towards the benefit of others in the most effective, best way. And due to our independence, may this virtue we accumulated also right now, right here and now, make a difference in this world. Affect people in a positive way. In particular in those places where right now there's great suffering, great confusion and fear. Okay. All right. That was about 20 minutes. It wasn't too bad. Okay, so we're done. Thank you very much for attending, for being with me, being with us, with Rinpoche and myself, and having the patience to listen, contemplate and meditate. And all that is left to say is take good care, be well, be safe, and maybe see you again in the future.
Thank you so much, Geshe, for all your care, for preparing the explanatory notes in the beginnings, and for your translations, your interpretations, and then for this review class. It has been very, very precious and amazing. Thank you so much, Geshe, and I hope we can welcome you very, very soon at Tushita again. Please, please, please. Hopefully in person. If not in person next year, then hopefully online. Please, Geshe, thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, all right. Okay, all the best to all of you. Okay, thank you, Kumben. All right.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.